I recently did a number of drawings in my local Australian bush, ink drawings on location. It's been a great experience, and from a learning point of view, it's very helpful to do a similar thing over and over within a relatively short period of time, because we get to build on what we've learned. As I was looking at these drawings and working out which are my favourites and less so favourites, I wonder what other people would think. So I posted 4 of them on my channel post page yesterday. And thank you very much for the well over 500 people who've voted already on your favourite. The fact though that your thoughts and my thoughts almost couldn't have been more opposite made me think what makes a good drawing and what makes what I consider to be a good drawing a good drawing. And of course there is a difference between if I'm the artist and I'm just someone looking at a drawing, because as the artist I also have in my mind what I was trying to achieve, and therefore a lot of my satisfaction is going to be bound up in have I achieved the things I've been wanting to achieve. Someone looking at my drawing is spared all of that angst and working out and can just judge it on the results. So while there's no right or wrong answer, let me share which ones I think are the strongest drawings and why. Let me start with a quick flip through of my sketchbook. This was the first one. This was the second drawing I did. This was the third drawing I did. And this was actually the 4th choice in my quiz. This is the 4th one I did. And this was the 3rd choice in my quiz. This one wasn't in the quiz. This one was the 2nd choice in the quiz. And this one was the 1st choice. So the first option was actually the last drawing I did. We were choosing between this one, this one, this one, and this one. Now, the way the votes tallied, the one by far that was preferred was this one. 68% of the people thought this was the best drawing. When I looked at the comments, it was felt that this was more interesting because there were rocks as well as foliage and there were stronger contrasts. In my mind, this is one of 2 that tied equal place for the ones I was least happy with. I'll talk about that in a moment though. The one that came in second by a long way down though was this one. 15% of people thought this was their favourite. This is one of the 2 top ones in my opinion. This one was the 3rd choice, quite close at 11% to the 2nd choice. And for a good way through the quiz time, this actually was a clear 2nd. This was one that in lots of ways I was very disappointed with. Which leaves this drawing with 6% of the votes as the least popular. And yet this is, I think, really my favourite of the 4. So let me explain why. And I think we'll start by explaining the problem I had with the one that was most popular. Now, potentially, this could have been a lovely drawing, and there are parts of it that I really do like. I really like this rock down here. There's nice kind of molded form. I like this bush down here that's very close, and so it's drawn in more detail with these leaves. I like things about this tree and the bark and the hatching as well. But what in the end made me unhappy with this, dissatisfied with this, was that I think I overworked this part too much. Not here or here. And I like the way these spiky leaves came in and visually interrupted what we could see past them. I like the way I capture that because that can be a bit tricky. But I feel that I simply went too dark in this area and this darkness in here, which made it all come forward and start to just mesh rather than give clarity as to what we were looking at. This all became too tangled, and I realized that I was unhappy with it when I'd kind of drawn this part, and then I went with a lighter pen and tried to get a lighter feel to give a sense of further away. So I actually think in some ways, in terms of depth perception and working out what's what, it's a little more successful up here. But it was really too late. So I was disappointed because I really liked this bush, and I liked this section down here, and I liked the base of this tree, but I needed to think a little more before I did the marks here on these rocks. For me, a really important aim in drawing the Australian bush is to untangle the clutter that we get when we try and draw the detail. I want to capture the detail, I want to capture the tangle, the complexity, the depth of plane, but also the contrast in shapes and edges and textures. So the challenge is drawing somehow all of those things, but maintaining clarity through the choice of marks that I make and how I make them and where I make them and where I choose not to make them. If I were to draw what I could see, we would never be able to work out anything that was in the drawing. So why I think some techniques have worked quite well in parts. Overall, not so happy with it. And that's this one. I think compositionally, it looked more exciting, more interesting in the bush, but I finished up with kind of 3 trees, very similar, very close to each other, and that's reflected in how they look. I had this rock that was in front of me, and then I had these really spiky bushes that are everywhere around where we live and can be challenging to draw. And my biggest problem is that I've simply overdrawn all of this section. There were a few comments that people liked there was more detail here. There's certainly more ink and there's more line work, but in my mind, there's not clarity with what we're looking at. These are 3-dimensional pom-pom spiky balls that come out at us from all directions. And we also see through them. I feel like this is like a web of inky lines, like a net that's been spread over, rather than 3-dimensional forms that have their own form and that we're seeing through. This hits me as very 2-dimensional. Now, I'm happier with some points. I quite like this midsection because I think where we have these trees, there is a sense of, closer and further, and also the things behind, and there's a sense of the foliage. Most of the gum leaves, most of the foliage is actually above this view from anything close. Just this spindly plant, probably it's an acacia, it's probably some sort of wattle, and some leaves further back. But I think I'd lost heart with this by the time I was doing this, because by that stage I realized that nothing was going to save this. And I think with these shadows I was a bit heavy-handed. They're a bit the same. This is very clearly in my mind the drawing I think that's least successful. So we come down to the 2 drawings that I think were the most successful. One of them comes in at 15% and the other one at 6%. This one and this one are my 2 personal favorites. Let me explain why. But in general terms, at a glance, I think it's more straightforward to understand what's happening. We have here the tops of some tufts of long rough grass that we have in the bush here. We're seeing through these to see a rock here. And I find this sort of thing technically can be a challenge to draw. We have this large tree and this spindly tree that are relatively close. And then we have a lot of other things further back that are much further back. We don't see any sky except in a little corner here. We're looking at bush that's on the other side of a small gully with a creek down the bottom. But it really is just value, which I've done by hatching. And here we have a series of layers of looking back through grass, rocks, some other vegetation that's closer, and then some that's further back than this. And it's something similar on this side. We have some low shrubby things here that extend for quite a way back into the depth of plane, and it's quite dark on the other side because all of this is backlit. I'm facing the sun. I had the challenge of the backlit shadow on particularly this very light gum tree. One of the reasons I prefer this to the two I've talked about so far is that technically I feel like I was successful. I feel like I've achieved the things I wanted to achieve, and I felt there were some really nice effects created, particularly this lower section here. I understand that when people look at this, we're going to be focused here at first, but I was also happy with these leaves up here, these close leaves, and also these branches that come across from outside the frame, or this one that intrudes from higher above, giving a sense that these are actually closer than almost anything else in our scene, except for perhaps these tall bits of grass here. I do think I went a little hard and heavy on outlining this tree. I think this one works just fine. There's lots of irregularities and little gaps that indicate the fact that the bark is flaking off this one. It's a different type of tree to this. But I feel like there's too much of a sense of outline here and here. I realized I'd done it and went a lot lighter up here. And I think this is much more successful. There is more sun bouncing around on this side than this side. So I let this one be a lighter effect. But I wish I'd done some of this more down here. Can I say these were all done on location? I didn't come home and adjust them. This then is the drawing I did yesterday. Now it has a lighter effect overall. I actually was standing while I drew this and was holding the pad in my hand. And that, I think, did discourage me from pressing too heavily on the pad. But overall, I probably like this one the best in that it solves the problems that these sorts of scenes throw up when we try and draw them with a fine liner pen. I didn't draw it with this one. I used some uni pens for these. I was happy with this. I think they're called xanthipus, these spiky things, because the temptation is we just draw lots of spikes. If you've seen my videos on drawing clumping plants, clumping grasses, you'll see what I talk about that I'm trying to put into practice here myself. This one isn't as successful. I did this one first and then I realized this one was closer and I should have done it first, and they weren't going to sort of overlap as nicely as they could have. But there was another significant one here further back behind all these trees. And so I wasn't just trying to draw more of the whole plant where we can see the overall shape, but also still trying to keep it feeling further away and behind these things that are closer. I was happy with that. We had a rock here, which was a nice bit of contrast. And this here was a tangle of leaf litter. And I was very conscious of trying to avoid this massive inky lines that really says nothing and looks very two-dimensional. As I said, like some sort of ink net just stretched across the lower section. I wanted to very much have a sense of looking through these fronds or leaves, spikes, whatever they are, and just getting a glimpse of, well, fallen twigs and leaf litter. I didn't want to overdraw it because I also wanted to have a heavier sense of ink in the center. Having been very determined not to get cluttered down here, again, I had a twig that's coming forward in the plane to us. I probably should have just defined that a little more strongly, but that would have been hard to do the way I was holding this in one hand and just drawing with the other with a fair bit of movement in my pad. The thing I really like about this though, this drawing, is this upper section where I've now got some branches that are coming towards me. Not so much that I can see here, but that are higher up and are coming towards me. And they're hanging, they're dropping some, not dropping, but they're hanging some leaves that are actually quite close, that visually come in front of some of the things further back, such as here. And some of these are quite close and I can see the individual leaves. So I want to suggest that, but others are further back and I'm trying to show them more just with some hatching for overall value. There is more sky in this. This basically is the line of vegetation. This is a ridge on the other side of the gorge, so it's quite some way away, and so this is basically all a line of green treetops. I deliberately left this light in here. It would have been easy to have put more things in here, such as I did there, but I wanted to keep more clarity with these two trunks going into the ground. And this was a very large, very wide tree that was quite some distance away. So I wanted to keep that sense of it was large, but it was in the distance. And all the time, it's this juggle between having contrast. See, it's the contrast of light and dark that let us easily see what's happening. I lost the contrast here. Too much value, too much degree of darkness that's the same makes it very hard to see what's happening with the line work. Conscious of, in my mind, this weakness of the previous one, I was working very hard to go lighter, to leave more paper, and it's this simplification, this selective simplification that I think is one of the key things to creating a sense of clarity. If I were voting, I'd have put this one first, this one second. Oops, we didn't use that one. This one third, and this one I would have put last. However, I will say I'm encouraged to think that perhaps this one isn't as problematic as I see it. So thanks to everyone who voted. I really appreciate your feedback and the stimulation it is to think about process. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. So why not do something such as this yourself? And however the drawings were going to turn out, I had an enjoyable hour sitting in the sounds and smells and sights of the Australian bush. Couldn't go wrong. I'll see you next time. Bye.